a bit further to talking about Iran specifically, which is Mona Ghassemi, who is the president of the Iranian Canadian Congress, the ICC. And Mona has been key in researching and preparing many of the ICC's statements in defense of democratic human rights in Canada and in the context of the ongoing genocide in Palestine. So I'll pass it over to you. Thank you, Mona.
Thank you so much for having me, Janine, and everyone who helped organize the event and the other speakers. It's thanks to the hard work of like-minded organizers that we're able to get our word out and call people to action. So I'll start by briefly describing the Iranian Canadian Congress. Basically, our mission is we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and non-religious organization established in 2007 to represent the interests of Iranian Canadians and encourage their participation in Canadian society. And we work through advocacy and education to meet these goals. Before I start, the Peace and Justice Network's June 28th statement, which was written on the occasion of an International Weekend of Action, does an excellent job of outlining some of the key historical and political facts around the current situation. And so I encourage folks to check that out. And I can also point to other resources later and maybe in the chat. So I'm not a lawyer, a historian, or a journalist. I'm an activist with training in social and cultural anthropology, whose medium is ethnography, which tends to focus on personal stories to get a view of the bigger picture. So I decided to frame my talk today by using my personal experience as a lens into the contemporary history of Iran and its relationship to imperialist powers. This won't be a complete picture, as that would be impossible in the time we have, nor will it be objective, as feminist anthropology also critiques the idea of scientific objectivity, but it will be one subjective lens on the picture. So I'm an Iranian Canadian living in Dojage, the unceded territory of the Canadian Nation, since the age of 2. I was born in Iran a month after Ayatollah Khomeini passed away, 10 years after the Iranian Revolution of 1979, and only 1 year after the end of the brutal 8 years war waged by Saddam Hussein and spurred on by the US against the newly formed Islamic Republic. I began developing a strong sense of social justice from an early age through the combined influence of being raised by parents who had lived through that extremely difficult period in our country's history, and also beginning to gain an interest in the evening news that followed my afternoon cartoons. I will never forget witnessing the images of the Palestinian man crouched against a wall, facing Israeli gunfire and trying to hide his young son behind him. The date of that event was September 30th, 2000. That boy, Mohammed Al-Dura, was 12 years old. Unfortunately, his father, Jamal's attempts to keep him safe were futile, and he was mortally wounded. I was 11 years old at the time. The imbalance and injustice were obvious to me. I knew about the illegal settlements. I knew that Iran did not recognize Israeli statehood. I had also seen the images of other Palestinian children, the Davids, who bravely threw rocks at the Israeli soldiers and their giant tanks that were the modern incarnation of Goliath. I knew then, and I know now, as evidenced by thousands more gut-wrenching images, that Israel kills children. I was 12 years old when 9/11 happened. I experienced firsthand the Islamophobia that came out from behind the mask of North American civil society in that period. I didn't have a word for it then, but I remember experiencing the manufacture of consent for the war on terror, first against Afghanistan and then against Iraq. And somehow it was always clear that Iran would be next. It took 24 years, but the US finally did strike Iranian soil last June in a cowardly and illegal bombing of nuclear energy infrastructure. I remember growing up, repeatedly hearing the words Iran and nuclear paired together on the news. My parents assured me that Iran did not have nuclear weapons. The supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, had forbidden it with a fatwa, a religious decree. a position some have argued recently should change in the pursuit of nuclear deterrence in the light of the events of last June. But the idea that Iran might one day build nuclear weapons always made Iran the bogeyman of Western media. I don't have the time to cover the details of Iran's nuclear program, their compliance with IAEA regulations, or the illegal US and Israeli cyber warfare attack dubbed Stuxnet, which damaged Iranian centrifuges in 2010 and was illegal under international law. But I will highlight the moment in 2015 when Iran, under the leadership of President Rouhani, came to an agreement with the Obama administration to reduce economic sanctions by allowing even more invasive nuclear inspections than that would normally be required by the IAEA. It was a moment of hope for many Iranians to open up the country and normalize the relationship with the US. That agreement was subsequently broken by Trump in his first term, who also had the audacity to assassinate Iran's General Qasem Soleimani on January 3rd, 2020, on Iraqi soil. This was how I came to know the Iranian Canadian Congress, as the organization was responsible for a major rally in my city in the wake of the assassination. Following the assassination, Iran was understandably on high alert for further military strikes, which tragically led to the downing of Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 by Iranian anti-aircraft missiles. Many Iranian Canadians were on that flight, and their families are still grieving and seeking accountability. And my heart goes out to each of them, as to lose a loved one in this way is unimaginable. The media in Canada, of course, in line with that in the US, twists these stories to align with their consent manufacturing machine. I had an appearance on Radio Canada, or the CBC, soon after the assassination of General Soleimani. They told me it was not a debate, but I was invited along with one other Iranian Canadian to get different opinions. I started by setting out the history of foreign intervention in Iran since the coup in 1953, backed up by British oil interests and the CIA, after Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized Iranian oil. I also talked about the economic sanctions, which included sanctions on basic medical supplies at the time, and how this was affecting regular people like my grandmother, who has since passed. I also spoke on how Soleimani was well loved in Iran and was a leader in the fight against ISIS. Now, that experience was very strange. The other guest, who I found out had been invited to the radio show many times, didn't seem interested in the reality on the ground, saying things like, he was not my general. And at least once, she slipped up with his name, calling him General Ghassemi. His name is, of course, General Qasem Soleimani. My name is Ghassemi. But after the downing of the passenger flight, I got another call from the radio station, and they asked me what I thought now, because I was allegedly very pro-regime in the prior interview. Now, I didn't have media training, so I was in shock. I couldn't find my words or the bravery to speak up about how what they were doing was absolutely junk journalism. I had simply stated facts, refusing to toe the line of the anti-Iran rhetoric that fuels the diplomatic isolation of Iran and the sanctions, which are a form of war, whose intention is to make the victims, everyday people, so desperate that they overthrow their own government. This was a very eye-opening experience for me. That same twisting and censoring continues to this day. In the weeks following the June attacks by Israel and the US against Iran, the ICC was very busy. One of my responsibilities as president was to respond to the media reaching out to us. Anytime I said anything of substance, it would be cut out. I was attempting to link the situation to the ongoing genocide in Palestine, consistent with ICC's position against violations of Canadians and Canadian organizations' right to protest and speak freely against the genocide. When I brought up Palestine in one interview, I was cut off and told, no, we only want to hear about what's going on between Israel and Iran. Of course, what is going on between Israel and Iran cannot be separated from what is going on in Palestine. Iran does not recognize Israeli statehood because Israel is a settler colonial state that is forcing Palestinians out of their homeland in any way possible. And Israel, correctly, views Iran as a threat to its colonial occupation and aggressive expansion in West Asia. Some of the other actions ICC took at the time included issuing a statement opposing the June 22nd US aggression on Iranian soil and the Canadian government's shameful response to it, organizing marches with social justice organizations across the country, such as the Palestinian Youth Movement in Toronto and Montreal, launching an Email Your MP campaign to oppose the war in Iran, signing a joint letter with 70 Iranian, Canadian, and civil society organizations to also oppose the war in Iran, and co-presenting a webinar with Just Peace to educate the public, similar to this one. In that webinar, several experts spoke more deeply than I have here on the legal context, the political context of the US drive toward hegemony in West Asia, and the escalations against Iran that took place in June. And that video is also available on YouTube if you're curious. Right now, one of our campaigns intends to address the processing delays for Iranian PR applicants. Due in no small part to the crippling Western sanctions, some Iranians come here as students or on work visas with the hope of establishing a new life here in Canada. But since Stephen Harper's government broke off all diplomatic relations with Iran in 2012, Iranian Canadians have no embassy in Canada nor Iran to go to for consular services. Because of the hardship this causes for Iranian Canadians and their kin, seeing the government of Canada restore diplomatic relations with Iran is a key goal for the ICC. And one of the recent escalations by Canada was declaring the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, as a terrorist entity. In Iran, military service is obligatory for men, so this policy has the potential to impact a lot of people. And we don't know if the delay in background checks for permanent residency is due to this factor, or it could just be general hostility towards Iran. So that's why ICC opposes this policy. In 2023, ICC also participated in Canada's public inquiry into foreign interference as one of few dissenting community voices, like Chinese Canadian organizations rightfully fighting xenophobia and a modern Red Scare. And as you can imagine, this is extremely difficult work because we often find ourselves going against the grain of the dominant narratives that are pushed by the warmongers that have financial and media backing. ICC is an entirely volunteer-based organization. The vast majority of our modest budget is from membership fees and some donations, and I do mean modest. Our financial statements are all available on our website if you wish to see for yourself. Occasionally, we're able to apply to some Canadian grants for a project, but truly this organization would not be able to function without the dedication of many, many hours on the part of the members of the board of directors and those of our members who choose to actively participate through committees. So I wanted to encourage folks to follow us and support us in whatever way you can so that we can continue with our work and speaking truth to power. And I hope the story of my lived experience and the advocacy that stems from it shines a light into the multiple injustices faced by Iranian people, living both in Canada and Iran and elsewhere abroad. I hope it encourages folks to think critically about the media narratives that paint Iranians as the anthropological other or as an oppressed people desperate to be saved from their government. Iranians are strong, proud, ambitious people, and while we do have our differences, we do not need saving, least of all by imperialism. Thank you very much for your time.